Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're plunging straight into a really bizarre and, well, enduring mystery.
Yeah, the strange events that happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. We're talking November 66 through December 67.
Exactly, and it's all documented meticulously, really, by John Keel in his book, The Mothman Prophecies. Hugely influential.
Right. And for you, our listener, maybe you want to get a good grip on fascinating topics like this pretty quickly, without drowning in details.
That's the idea.
Well, this deep dive is all about pulling out the most compelling bits from Keel's account. Think of it as your fast track to understanding this classic of the unexplained.
Perfect way to put it. Our mission today, unpack the core of this wild story. We'll look at the Mothman sightings, obviously, but also the UFOs, the men in black showing up.
The weird prophecies.
Yeah, the eerie prophecies that seem to come true. And then, of course, that awful tragedy, the Silver Bridge collapse. So, okay, where do we even start with all this?
Well, I think a good place to begin is with the author himself, John Keel. His background really kind of colors how he saw everything.
Absolutely. Keel was, well, he was quite a character. Started writing super young, like 12 years old.
Yeah, and by the early 70s, he was a pretty major voice exploring all sorts of fringe stuff, not just, flying saucers.
He went way beyond that. His experiences were pretty broad, too, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. He was in the U.S. Army, had a radio show way back in 1952 called Things in the Sky.
52. So he was into weird aerial stuff early on.
Definitely. And he even claimed he saw a UFO himself over the Aswan Dam a few years later.
Get this, too. After the Army, he spent like 3 years traveling Middle East, Asia, investigating local legends, like the Yeti.
Right, he wrote about that in J. his early autobiography. So, yeah, long before Point Pleasant, he was already digging into strange things.
A seasoned investigator of the unusual, for sure.
But what's really key here is how Keel's thinking changed over time. He started out, looking at UFOs pretty conventionally, collecting reports.
But he shifted.
He did. He started calling himself a 14. Someone interested in all kinds of strange stuff science doesn't easily explain. His focus broadened.
Right, not just aliens. Yeah. And he's the guy who popularized the term men in black.
Yeah.
We have to circle back to that.
We definitely do. But maybe the most crucial thing to grasp is why he moved away from the extraterrestrial hypothesis for UFOs.
Yeah, what made him ditch the idea that UFOs are just spaceships from other planets? That's what ETH basically means, for anyone listening.
Well, it seems like it came directly from how he investigated. He wasn't just reading reports someone else wrote. He was out there, boots on the ground.
Talking to witnesses himself.
Exactly. Lots of travel, especially in the Midwest, doing firsthand interviews. And he said that through doing that, he saw, his words, an astonishing overlap between psychic phenomena and UFOs.
An astonishing overlap. Okay, wow, that's a big claim.
Yeah.
So you start thinking UFO reports weren't always physical ships.
Yeah, maybe more like subjective experiences, almost like the kind of visions or shared experiences that feed into folklore or, religious beliefs throughout history.
That's a major departure from the usual alien narrative.
It really is. And it suggests his later ideas, the more complex stuff about ultra-terrestrials and manipulation, they weren't just pulled out of thin air. For him, they followed logically from the patterns he was seeing.
Okay.
And the Mothman Prophecies, which came out in 75, is really seen as the peak of this viewpoint. It focuses on those 13 months of intense weirdness.
13 months centered around this creature, the Mothman. Okay, for anyone maybe not familiar, what was the Mothman, basically? How did people describe it?
Well, the core description is a large winged creature, humanoid shape, maybe 6.5, 7 feet tall.
Big.
Yeah, really big. And the most striking thing, the eyes, big glowing red eyes. People often said they look like car reflectors. Oh. Very. And it was described as man-shaped, but with large wings, usually folded against its back. Sometimes people compared them to bat wings, grayish color, usually.
And it wasn't just one person seeing this, right? There were multiple sightings early on.
Oh, yeah. Things really kicked off around November 1966. One early one was 5 guys digging a grave near Clendenin, West Virginia.
Digging a grave. Okay.
Yeah. November 12th. They said they saw a man-like figure fly low from the trees right over their heads. Pretty unsettling.
I'll say. But the sighting that really blew up, the one that put Mothman on the map.
Yeah.
That was the two young couples, wasn't it?
That's the one. Roger and Linda Scarberry, Steve and Mary Millette. Their encounter happened shortly after that Clendenin report.
Where was it?
Near an old, abandoned TNT storage area just outside Point Pleasant. And their description really lined up with the others. The size, the shape, folded wings, those red eyes.
And the way it moved. It was weird too, right? They said it flew really fast.
Yeah, incredibly fast. Without obviously flapping its wings. They claimed it kept pace with their car when they were driving like 100 miles per hour.
Wow. Chasing a car at 100 miles per hour without flapping? That's not a bird.
Definitely not. And the place they saw it, that TNT area, that adds another layer.
How so?
It was this huge complex of old concrete bunkers from World War II, just left there. Really desolate, kind of dangerous maybe. It just amplified the whole creepy vibe of the sighting.
Yeah, you can picture it. Bizarre creature, spooky abandoned place.
Yeah.
Classic horror setup. But the weirdness in Point Pleasant, it wasn't just Mothman, was it? These men in black figures start showing up too.
Absolutely. Keel includes some really disturbing stories about them.
Yeah.
One that stands out is from late November '67, so this is just weeks before the bridge collapse.
Okay.
Middle of the night, there's a bad storm, and this tall stranger, dressed all in black, shows up at the door of this remote farmhouse.
In a storm. What was weird about him, besides being dressed in black?
Well, Keel notes he had muddy dress shoes on in a storm out in the country. And apparently he had a beard, which Keel says was unusual for men in that area then, just off.
Muddy dress shoes. Yeah, that's a detail that sticks with you. Raises red flags immediately. The couple must have been freaked out.
Understandably terrified. They apparently told friends later they thought he was a fearful omen. Some even thought maybe the devil himself.
Wow. Heavy stuff.
And the really tragic part, just 3 weeks later, that same couple died in the Silver Bridge collapse. Keel puts that story right near the beginning when talking about MIBs, immediately linking these figures to the coming disaster.
That's a powerful, chilling way to frame it. And then there's the whole Woodrow Derenberger thing with Indrid Cold that also seems to fit this pattern of weird visitors.
Yes, Derenberger. He was just described as an ordinary salesman selling appliances, but he reported multiple meetings with this entity called Indrid Cold.
Indrid Cold. Oh, Cold wasn't exactly human.
Well, he looked human, apparently, but Derenberger claimed he communicated telepathically and said he was from another planet. Lanulos.
Telepathy. Other planets. Okay, now we're definitely in classic contactee territory. What did this Indrid Cold look like?
Derenberger gave a pretty specific description. About 5'10", long dark hair, combed back, very tan skin, usually wore a dark topcoat, but underneath, get this, glistening greenish material, almost metallic.
Huh. Metallic green clothes under a dark coat. That description, especially the dark coat, the slightly unnatural vibe, it really echoes that Men in Black archetype, doesn't it?
It really does. It feels like all these different weird threads, Mothman, UFOs maybe, these strange figures, they're all starting to kind of tangle together in Point Pleasant.
Yeah, it's not just one isolated thing.
Exactly. And the weirdness wasn't just visual stuff either. There were also these strange communications happening.
Like what kind of things? Phone calls?
Phone calls, yeah, but also stranger stuff. Like this phrase, wake up down there. Several people reported hearing that through TVs or radios. Seriously. Wake up down there. Coming through the TV. That is incredibly creepy. Like something out of a nightmare.
Right. Often distorted, lots of static, just deeply unsettling. And yes, there were also lots of weird phone calls reported.
From who?
Unidentified people. Callers who somehow knew things about the person they were calling, about the weird stuff going on. Some people thought it might be Indrid Cold and maybe other MIB types.
What did they say?
Often just vague, unsettling warnings, or they'd talk in riddles. It just added to this growing feeling of unease, paranoia even in the town.
It's like this invisible net of strangeness closing in, seeping through technology. And didn't Keel notice something specific about Wednesdays, the Wednesday phenomenon?
He did, yeah. He analyzed a ton of UFO reports from the mid-'60s, and he claimed there was a statistical spike in sightings on Wednesday nights.
Really? Wednesday?
Specifically between like 8 p.m. and 11 p.m. on Wednesdays. A disproportionate number seemed to cluster then, according to his analysis. That is oddly specific. A Wednesday phenomenon. It suggests some kind of pattern, even if you can't explain why. So, okay, all this stuff is happening. Mothman, MIBs, weird calls, Wednesday spikes. Keel starts putting together his own theory, moving away from just aliens.
Exactly. His own investigations really pushed him past the ETH, He came up with his ultra-terrestrial, or UT, hypothesis.
Ultra-terrestrials, UTs, so not physical aliens from space, but something else.
Yeah, something more. Non-physical, maybe. Powerful intelligences, but not necessarily biological beings from another planet, maybe from other dimensions, or what he called the super-spectrum realities beyond what we normally perceive.
Wow. Okay, so how did he see these UTs operating? What do they do?
He saw them as manipulators, shapeshifters. His idea was they could manifest as UFOs, or as cryptids like Mothman, or as Men in Black.
So they could look like whatever they wanted, or whatever we expected.
Kinda. He famously said something like, "We see what we want to see and interpret such visions according to our contemporary beliefs. They adapt."
That's a really interesting concept, that these things tailor themselves to us. And this tied into his idea of a control system, right?
Yes, exactly. He suggested this huge ancient control system run by these ultra-terrestrials. They stage paranormal events, he sometimes called them games, to kind of nudge human history and consciousness along over centuries.
A vast cosmic game.
Yeah.
It's a pretty grand, almost conspiratorial view of the paranormal.
It is, yeah. Very broad, very unconventional. But it's worth noting, Keel himself seemed a bit, well, ambiguous about the UT theory later on, didn't he?
Oh, really? How so?
Well, in later interviews and writings, he apparently suggested the whole ultra-terrestrial thing might have been more of a literary device, a way to frame the inexplicable.
Not necessarily a literal explanation he's stuck by.
Possibly. He even threw out the idea that the intelligence behind it all might just be us, humanity itself, like a reflection of our collective unconscious or something.
Whoa. That really flips the script. It's a whole other layer to thinking about his work. Okay, but while all this strangeness is swirling in Point Pleasant, there's this growing dread. These prophecies start cropping up, all pointing towards the Silver Bridge disaster.
Right. Keel really emphasizes his buildup. Reports of warnings, prophecies, creating this real sense of impending doom in the community, like something awful was unavoidable.
And then
Yeah.
it happened. December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge. What exactly went down?
It was about 5 p.m., peak rush hour traffic.
Yeah.
The bridge connected Point Pleasant, West Virginia with Gallipolis, Ohio over the Ohio River, and it just failed suddenly, catastrophically.
People saw it happen.
Yeah, witnesses described it shuddering violently, then just disintegrating. Cars, people plunged straight into the freezing river.
Just horrific. How many people?
46 people lost their lives, a terrible real-world tragedy.
And for Keel, this was it. This was the culmination of everything, right? The fulfillment of the Mothman prophecies.
That's exactly how he frames it. He heavily implies the collapse was the fulfillment, the thing all the weirdness had been building towards. And interestingly, many locals claim that after the bridge fell, the intense Mothman sightings, the other high strangeness,
Yeah.
it just stopped.
It stopped right after the collapse.
Pretty much immediately, according to those accounts. Which, of course, really strengthens Keel's narrative linking the phenomena to the disaster.
Even though the official cause was determined to be structural failure.
Right, that's the crucial counterpoint. The official investigation blamed stress corrosion cracking in one specific part, a single eye bar in the suspension chain, purely structural.
But Keel's book leaves you wondering if there was more to it, a paranormal angle.
Definitely. He plants that seed, encouraging the reader to see a deeper connection.
So looking back now, what's the lasting impact of the Mothman prophecies? Why are we still talking about it?
Well, despite all the debate about Keel's methods or how accurate it all is, the book's influence is undeniable. It really cemented the Mothman in American folklore.
Yeah, up there with Bigfoot or Nessie now, almost.
For sure. And it massively popularized the Men in Black concept, too. That image owes a lot to Keel.
You see MIBs referenced everywhere now in UFO stuff and conspiracies.
Exactly. And it's fascinating how Point Pleasant itself has leaned into it. They have the Mothman Festival every year, the museum, the statue.
It's become part of their identity, hasn't it? A way to process that strange, tragic time.
It really has. And Keel's big idea, the ultra-terrestrial alternative to the ETH, that definitely influenced later paranormal researchers. Pushed them to think beyond just aliens and ships.
Yeah, opened up ideas about dimensions, manipulation, things beyond just nuts and bolts explanations.
Precisely. Even the movie adaptation in 2002, though it simplified things and changed stuff, it helped push the Mothman legend even further into pop culture.
Right. So, okay, wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered the core stuff. The truly bizarre events in Point Pleasant, the Mothman creature itself, those unsettling Men in Black visits.
The strange messages, the prophecies building up, Keel's very unique ultra-terrestrial idea, and then the Silver Bridge collapse as this awful climax to it all.
And it's clear Keel's book whatever you think of its conclusions, gives you this really thought-provoking, maybe disturbing way to look at unexplained events.
Yeah, it forces you to think about manipulation, how subjective our experiences might be, and whether there are forces. Well, forces we just don't understand using conventional science.
Which kind of brings us to a final thought for you, listening. When you consider Keel's own later doubts about his UT theory, that it might have been a literary tool, or maybe the intelligence is even us, what does our ongoing fascination with the Mothman prophecies really tell us? Maybe about our own deep-seated need to find meaning, to find patterns and connection, especially when we're faced with things that just seem completely random or inexplicable.
That's a great question to chew on. Maybe it points to something fundamental about how we try to make sense of the unknown.
Perhaps it's worth diving a bit deeper into that whole world of 14 thought and the long, strange history of paranormal beliefs. Anyway, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.